The moment my sister-in-law looked my daughter in the eyes and said, "You're not a bridesmaid, sweetie. You're more like the maid," I felt my blood turn to ice. She said it with such casual cruelty, her perfect red lips curved into a smile, champagne glass dangling between manicured fingers, and everyone at the bridal shower, they all laughed. My daughter, Maddie, just 16 and so desperate to be part of her beloved cousin's wedding, stood frozen beside the mountain of expensive gifts, the handmade gift bag she'd spent weeks creating clutched against her chest. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I wanted to scream. I wanted to gather Maddie in my arms and storm out. I wanted to flip the table of petit fours and designer water bottles with custom labels bearing the couple's monogram. But I did none of those things. Instead, I watched my daughter swallow back tears and force a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Whatever Olivia needs," she said, trying to sound casual, grown up. "I'm just happy to help." That night, I found Maddie sitting cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by photos of her and her cousin Olivia. Pictures spanning 15 years, building sandcastles at the lake house, blowing out birthday candles side by side, holding hands at Olivia's father's funeral. They weren't just cousins. They had been as close as sisters once. Before Olivia met Richard. Before she moved into his world of country club memberships and summer homes in the Hamptons. Before she started treating Maddie like an afterthought, useful only for errands and Instagram photos captioned with empty words about family. "Mom," Maddie said quietly, not looking up from a photo of her and Olivia at 12 years old, gap-toothed, and sunburned after a day of swimming. "Why doesn't she want me as a bridesmaid? What did I do wrong?" The question cracked my heart wide open. In that moment, I almost called my brother David, Olivia's father, to tell him exactly what his daughter and her fiancé's family had done, but something stopped me. The wedding was 3 weeks away. David had already lost his wife 7 years ago. Olivia was all he had left. He'd spent a fortune on this wedding, desperate to give his daughter the perfect day, to stand in for both parents. Could I really be the one to tell him how cruel his daughter had become? "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart," I said, sitting beside Maddie and brushing her dark hair back from her face. "Sometimes people change when they're trying to fit into a different world. It doesn't mean they don't love you anymore." But as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them anymore. Love doesn't make you small. Love doesn't make you cruel. And I wasn't sure what was left of the Olivia we had known. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have imagined, was that 3 weeks later, my quiet, gentle daughter would stand up at that wedding reception and change everything with nothing but the truth and a single letter. Before the wedding, before the Maid comment and the tears, there was just us, me, Maddie, and our modest life in Oak Ridge, a small town 3 hours from the gleaming city where Olivia now lived. Our house wasn't large, but it had a wraparound porch and a vegetable garden that Maddie tended with quiet dedication. The walls were covered with photos and children's artwork preserved from earlier years, school certificates, and handmade decorations. I'd raised Maddie mostly on my own since her father left when she was 4. He sent checks and occasional birthday cards, but he'd started a new family in Arizona, and Maddie had learned early not to expect much. I worked as a high school English teacher, which paid the bills but didn't leave much for extras. Maddie never complained. She worked part-time at the local bookstore, saved for college, and found magic in small things. Wildflowers pressed between book pages, stars viewed through a second-hand telescope, stories written in notebooks with worn covers. My brother David lived in the same town with Olivia until his wife Elena died of cancer. Elena had been my best friend since college. She was the one who introduced me to my ex-husband. After she died, David threw himself into his work as an architect, eventually moving to the city for a prestigious position. Olivia, devastated by her mother's death, clung to Maddie during those awful months. The girls, only 8 months apart in age, became inseparable, spending weekends and summers together, sharing clothes and secrets and dreams. "Maddie, you're the sister I always wanted," Olivia would say, braiding my daughter's hair on summer nights on our porch, fireflies blinking in the darkness beyond the railing. Then David met Richard's mother, Vivian, at a charity gala. Vivian, a wealthy widow with social connections throughout the city, took a liking to the handsome widower architect. Soon, playdates were arranged between 16-year-old Olivia and Vivian's son Richard, a college sophomore. What started as friendly family gatherings evolved into something more calculated. Vivian approved of David's background and career, if not his modest bank account. David, still raw from grief, was flattered by Vivian's attention and the doors she opened for him in the city's elite social circles. And Olivia, sweet, grief-stricken Olivia, blossomed under Vivian's wing. She traded her jeans and hoodies for designer dresses, her book club for cotillion classes, her public school for a prestigious private academy. And somewhere in that transformation, her friendship with Maddie began to fray around the edges. It started with missed calls, then canceled visits. "Sorry, Mads, I have a charity event with Richard's family." Or, "Can't talk now, I'm at dinner with Vivian's friends." The few times Maddie visited the city, she returned quieter, more withdrawn. Once, she mentioned that Olivia's new friends had made fun of her thrift store jacket. Another time, she came home early because Olivia had forgotten she'd invited her and made other plans. "It's fine, Mom," Maddie would say, forcing a smile. "Olivia has a different life now, I get it." But I saw the hurt she tried to hide, the confusion when her oldest friend seemed to look through her rather than at her. Teenagers drift apart. I knew that as both a mother and a teacher. But this felt different. It felt deliberate, as though Olivia was being molded into someone who had no place for my daughter in her life. When the wedding invitation arrived, embossed on thick cream paper with gold foil and a wax seal, Maddie's face lit up. "See? She still wants us there," she said, running her fingers over Olivia's elegant new monogram. She spent 2 days selecting the perfect dress, settling on a simple blue one that brought out her eyes. She withdrew half her college savings to buy a gift. A hand-bound book filled with photos and memories of her and Olivia growing up, accompanied by a silver picture frame she'd saved for months to afford. "Do you think she'll ask me to be a bridesmaid?" Maddie asked one night, her voice casual, but her eyes hopeful. I hesitated. "Honey, I think the wedding party might already be set. It's only 3 months away. But we always said we'd be in each other's weddings, since we were little." I didn't have the heart to tell her that the Olivia who made that promise seemed to have disappeared into thin air. A week later, we received a call from Olivia herself, the first in months. "Aunt Sarah, I need a huge favor," she said, her voice bright and breathless over the speakerphone. "I absolutely need Maddie to come to the city this weekend for the bridal shower. Mother Vivian is flying in her wedding planner from Paris, and we're having a special tea at the Peninsula. We need help with some of the behind-the-scenes details, and I thought, who better than my favorite cousin?" Maddie's face glowed. She mouthed, "See?" and gave me a thumbs up. "That's so sweet of you to include her, Olivia," I said cautiously. "What kind of help do you need?" "Oh, helping with the gifts, taking photos for social, making sure everyone's champagne is topped off, that sort of thing. The shower's at noon on Saturday, but could she come up Friday? There are some errands we could use help with." Before I could respond, Maddie jumped in. "Of course I'll come. I can take the early bus on Friday." "Perfect," Olivia trilled. "And Aunt Sarah, you're welcome to come to the shower too, of course. I sent your invitation last week. You should get it soon." My invitation never arrived, but I drove Maddie to the bus station that Friday morning. Anyway, watching her clutch her weekend bag and the carefully wrapped bridal shower gift. "Call me if you need anything," I said, kissing her forehead. "Anything at all." She rolled her eyes, 16 and invincible again. "Mom, I'll be fine. It's just Olivia." But when I picked her up from the bus station Sunday evening, I knew immediately that things had not been fine. Maddie's eyes were red-rimmed, her shoulders hunched. She didn't speak as we loaded her bag into the car, didn't respond when I asked how the weekend had gone. It wasn't until we were halfway home, darkness gathering around the car, that she finally spoke. "They made me serve drinks," she said, her voice flat. "Like a waitress, in front of everyone." "What?" I glanced at her, then back at the road. "What do you mean?" "At the shower. Olivia's bridesmaids, these girls from her new school and Richard's sister, they all had matching pink dresses. They sat at the head table with Olivia and Vivian, and I stood in the kitchen with the catering staff." Her voice cracked. "Olivia didn't even introduce me to anyone. When her friends asked who I was, she just said I was helping out." Anger flared in my chest. "Maddie, It gets worse," she interrupted, staring out the window at the darkening fields. "When it was time for gifts, I had to bring them to Olivia one by one, then take them to a separate table to be photographed for her registry. Richards' sister, Blake, kept snapping her fingers at me when she wanted me to move faster. And then," her voice caught, "then Olivia opened my gift." I remembered the book, how Maddie had stayed up for weeks selecting photos, writing captions, assembling the pages with such care. "She barely looked at it," Maddie whispered. She said, "Oh, how crafty," and handed it to Vivian, who put it under the table. Not even with the other gifts. Under the table, Mom. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. "I'm calling David. Tonight. This is unacceptable." "No!" Maddie turned to me, suddenly animated. "Please don't. Uncle David was so happy. He kept looking at Olivia like she was Elena. He finally seems okay again. Please, Mom." "But Maddie, the way they treated you." "It's fine. I'm fine." She took a shaky breath. "It was just a bad weekend. But there's something else." "What?" "What else happened?" Maddie was quiet for a long moment. "Richard has a friend, Alex. He was there helping set up before the shower. He's one of the groomsmen." She paused. "I overheard him and Richard talking in the kitchen when they thought everyone was out on the terrace." A chill ran through me. "What did they say?" "Richard was laughing about how he'd sealed the deal with the prenup. He said Olivia didn't even read it before signing, that she was too starry-eyed to notice the terms." Maddie turned to me, her face pale in the dashboard lights. "He said once they're married, he gets control of Uncle David's investment in their new house. He called Olivia his meal ticket to the best commission of his career." My blood ran cold. Richard was a real estate developer, working for his family's company. The luxurious home he and Olivia were moving into after the wedding had been purchased with a substantial down payment from David, nearly his entire savings, meant to give his daughter security and a fresh start. "There's more," Maddie said, quietly. Alex asked if Olivia was worth it, having to play husband to lock down the investment. And Richard said, her voice broke. He said, "For $3 million in commission, I'd marry the help." For a moment, all I could hear was the hum of tires on asphalt and my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. "Did you tell Olivia?" Maddie shook her head. "I tried. After everyone left, I found her alone and started to tell her what I'd heard. But before I could finish, Vivian came in and said I was being dramatic and trying to ruin Olivia's happiness because I was jealous." She looked down at her hands. "And Olivia believed her. She told me if I couldn't be happy for her, maybe I shouldn't come to the wedding at all." "That's when she said that thing, about you being the maid, not a bridesmaid?" "Yeah." Maddie's voice was barely audible. Everyone laughed. I pulled the car over to the side of the road and put it in park, then turned to face my daughter fully. Maddie, listen to me. You don't have to go to this wedding. We don't have to go. What they did was cruel and inexcusable. She was quiet. For a long moment, then looked up at me with clear eyes. I have to go, Mom. Why? After how they treated you? Because Olivia isn't really the problem. Maddie straightened her shoulders. And someone needs to tell her the truth. The wedding invitation specified black tie optional, which meant my one good dress, a navy sheath I'd worn to the last 3 years of school fundraisers, wasn't quite formal enough. I spent 2 weeks' grocery money on a floor-length burgundy gown from a consignment shop, and Maddie helped me adjust the hem. For herself, she chose a simple silver dress, modest but elegant. She looked older than her 16 years. Her dark hair swept into a low chignon, her eyes serious behind minimal makeup. You look beautiful, I told her the morning of the wedding, watching her fasten a delicate silver bracelet around her wrist, a gift from Elena on her 10th birthday. Are you sure you want to do this? We can still send our regrets. Maddie shook her head. I'm sure, Mom. The ceremony was held at St. Mark's Cathedral, a massive stone edifice with soaring arches and stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the marble floors. David had spared no expense. Thousands of white roses and orchids adorned every surface, their sweet scent almost overwhelming in the enclosed space. A string quartet played as guests found their seats, the music echoing off the ancient stones. We were seated toward the back, far from the family section, despite my being the bride's only maternal aunt. I spotted David at the front, handsome, in his tuxedo, his face alight with nervous joy. He didn't see us arrive. He was too busy greeting Vivian, resplendent in pale blue silk, her white blonde hair twisted into an elaborate updo, adorned with diamonds that caught the light with every movement. She looks like she's already practicing to be mother of the groom, I murmured, then immediately regretted it when I saw Maddie's face. Sorry, honey. That wasn't fair. Maddie squeezed my hand. It's okay, Mom. Just watch. The music changed, and 6 bridesmaids processed down the aisle in identical blush gowns, each carrying a small bouquet of roses and baby's breath. I recognized Richard's sister Blake among them, her sharp features arranged in a practiced smile. There was no junior bridesmaid, no place for Maddie among them. The space where she should have been, where she had always imagined herself, was filled by strangers. Then came Olivia on David's arm. Her dress was a masterpiece of hand-beaded lace and silk, with a cathedral train that required 2 attendants to manage. A diamond tiara secured her veil, and around her neck hung Elena's pearl pendant, the one she had always promised to wear on her wedding day. For a moment, with the sun streaming through the stained glass behind her, she looked so much like her mother that my breath caught. Beside me, Maddie whispered, "She looks like Aunt Elena." "She does," I agreed softly. The ceremony proceeded, with flawless precision. Olivia and Richard exchanged vows they had written themselves. Hers were emotional, speaking of lost loved ones and new beginnings. His were polished but generic, focused more on their future success than on love. If I hadn't known what Maddie had overheard, I might not have noticed the hollow ring to his promises, the way his eyes didn't quite meet Olivia's during the most intimate moments. As they were pronounced husband and wife, I glanced at Maddie. A single tear traced down her cheek, but her expression remained composed, determined. She clutched a small cream envelope in her hands, her fingers pressing down on the corners as if to keep the contents contained. "What's that?" I whispered. "The truth," she replied simply. The reception was held at the Grand Plaza Hotel, its ballroom transformed into a winter wonderland of crystal, silver, and white. Ice sculptures graced each table, slowly melting under the warmth of 1,000 candles. A 10-piece orchestra played as guests mingled during cocktail hour, waitstaff, circulating with trays of champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. David found us as we entered, enveloping me in a warm hug. "Sarah! I've been looking everywhere for you. Where were you seated at the ceremony?" "Near the back," I said, not wanting to ruin his happiness with complaints. He frowned. "That can't be right. I'll speak to the coordinator." Then he turned to Maddie, his face softening. "And look at you, all grown up. You look just like your mother did at your age." Maddie smiled, genuine for the first time that day. "Thanks, Uncle David. The ceremony was beautiful." He beamed, the pride of a father radiating from him. "Isn't she stunning? Just like Elena." His voice caught slightly on his late wife's name. "I wish she could have been here to see it." "She would have been so proud," I said, meaning it. Elena would have been proud of the woman Olivia could have become, should have become. Not this stranger who had forgotten where she came from, who had discarded people who loved her in pursuit of a glossier life. David was pulled away by the wedding planner, a severe-looking woman with a clipboard and an earpiece. As soon as he was gone, I felt a cool presence at my elbow. Vivian stood there, impeccably groomed and subtly assessing my consignment shop gown. "Sarah, so glad you could make it," she said, her smile not reaching her pale blue eyes. "And Maddie, isn't it? I believe the wedding coordinator has some tasks for you during the reception. Something about helping with the guest book?" Before I could object, Maddie spoke up, her voice calm and clear. "Actually, Mrs. Harrington, I'm here as a guest, my cousin's guest." Vivian's smile tightened. "Of course, dear, but Olivia mentioned you were so helpful at the shower, and we could really use an extra hand with—" "My daughter is not staff," I interrupted, keeping my voice low but firm. "She's family. Olivia's family." Vivian's eyes narrowed slightly, but she maintained her plastic smile. "Of course, my mistake." She turned and glided away, her silk dress whispering against the marble floor. "You didn't have to do that," Maddie murmured. "I can handle her." "I know you can," I replied. "But that doesn't mean you should have to." We found our seats for dinner, at the very back of the ballroom, far from the head table where Olivia, Richard, and their wedding party sat beneath a canopy of twinkling lights and suspended orchids. David was seated with Vivian and Richard's father, a stern-looking man who I'd yet to see smile. Our table mates were distant acquaintances of David's and an elderly cousin no one had spoken to in years. The meal was served, each course more elaborate than the last. Wine flowed freely, and the orchestra played softly in the background. Olivia looked radiant, laughing at something Richard whispered in her ear, accepting congratulations from a steady stream of well-wishers. From a distance, they looked like the perfect couple, young and beautiful and blessed. "When are you going to give it to her?" I asked Maddie quietly, nodding toward the envelope she'd kept close all evening. "Soon," she said, her eyes on the head table, just waiting for the right moment. That moment came after dinner, when the cake had been cut and the formal dances completed. The reception moved into its celebratory phase, guests filling the dance floor, the orchestra replaced by a DJ spinning upbeat music. Olivia, flushed with champagne and happiness, moved from table to table, accepting well wishes and compliments on her perfect day. When she reached our table, she bent to embrace me, the scent of her expensive perfume enveloping me. "Aunt Sarah, I'm so glad you could come," she said, and for a moment, I heard the echo of the little girl who used to run into my arms when David dropped her off for weekends. "Wouldn't have missed it," I replied, squeezing her hands. "Your mother would have loved every minute of this." Something flickered in her eyes. Grief, recognition, perhaps regret. Then she turned to Maddie, her smile becoming a bit more fixed. "Maddie, you look so grown up." Maddie stood, smoothing the skirt of her silver dress. Thanks, Liv. You look beautiful. An awkward silence fell between them, years of shared history and recent hurts suspended in the space between their bodies. Olivia glanced around, as if looking for an escape, and I saw Maddie's shoulders tense. I have something for you, Maddie said suddenly, reaching for the cream envelope. A wedding gift. Just from me. Olivia's expression softened slightly. Oh, you didn't have to. I wanted to, Maddie interrupted, pressing the envelope into her cousin's hands. But maybe read it privately. It's personal. Curiosity crossed Olivia's face. She glanced down at the envelope, then tucked it into the hidden pocket of her wedding gown. Thanks, Mads. I'll read it later. Promise? Maddie's voice was suddenly urgent. Promise you'll read it before you leave for your honeymoon? Olivia laughed, a little uneasily. I promise. We don't leave until tomorrow afternoon anyway. She glanced over her shoulder, where Richard was deep in conversation with several older men. I should get back. Talk later? But she was already. Moving away, swept into the next group of well-wishers, the envelope forgotten in her pocket. Maddie watched her go, a mix of emotions playing across her face. Do you think she'll read it? I asked softly. Maddie nodded. She promised. And whatever else has changed, Olivia doesn't break promises. Our relationship with Olivia's family stretched back decades, well before either of our daughters were born. David and I grew up in a small farming community where everyone knew each other's business and helping hands were always extended in times of need. Our parents had taught us that family was sacred, that blood ties meant showing up, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. I met Elena during my sophomore year of college. She was an exchange student from Spain with a laugh that filled rooms and a talent for seeing the best in everyone. When I introduced her to David during a holiday break, I watched something extraordinary bloom between them, a connection so instant and profound that it seemed written in the stars. They married 2 years later in a simple ceremony in our parents' backyard, wildflowers in Elena's hair, David's eyes never leaving her face throughout the entire day. Olivia arrived exactly 9 months later, a perfect blend of her father's steady strength and her mother's fiery spirit. I stood as her godmother, promising to always be there for her, a vow I took as seriously as any I'd ever made. When Maddie was born 8 months after Olivia, Elena returned the favor, becoming my rock during a difficult pregnancy and an even more difficult marriage. They will be sisters, Elena declared, placing infant Maddie's tiny hand in Olivia's. Slightly larger one. Not cousins, sisters. And for so many years, that's exactly what they were. Despite living in different towns, the girls grew up more like siblings than cousins. Weekends, holidays, summer breaks, they were inseparable. They shared clothes, secrets, inside jokes that no one else understood. They created elaborate fantasy worlds in the woods behind my house, built blanket forts that took up entire rooms, stayed up whispering long after they should have been asleep. Olivia was the adventurous one, always climbing higher, swimming, farther, dreaming bigger. Maddie was more thoughtful, the planner, the one who packed extra sandwiches just in case, and remembered to bring Band-Aids for inevitable scrapes. They balanced each other perfectly. When Maddie's father left, abandoning our family for a co-worker, it was Elena who drove 3 hours to sit with me as I sorted through the wreckage of my marriage. And it was Olivia who crawled into bed with Maddie night after night, holding her close as she cried herself to sleep. You'll always have me, Olivia promised, fierce in her 10-year-old loyalty. We're sisters, remember? Not by blood, but by choice, and that's stronger. Those words became a mantra between them, repeated, through middle school drama, first crushes, petty arguments, sisters by choice. They made plans for their futures. They'd go to the same college, be bridesmaids in each other's weddings, raise their children together. The bond seemed unbreakable. Until Elena got sick. Cancer, Swift, merciless, unstoppable. Within 6 months of diagnosis, she was gone, leaving behind a devastated husband and a 12-year-old daughter who couldn't comprehend how the center of her universe had suddenly vanished. Maddie and I practically moved in with David and Olivia that first month, handling funeral arrangements, cooking meals that went untouched, fielding calls from well-meaning friends. I sat with David late into the night as he cycled through grief's jagged stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression. I held Olivia when nightmares jolted her awake, her mother's name a desperate cry in the darkness. "Why didn't she fight harder?" Olivia asked one night, her voice small in the shadows of her bedroom. "If she loved us, why didn't she stay?" I had no answers that could heal that particular wound. I could only hold her, stroke her hair the way Elena had, and promise that she would never be alone. Grief changed David. The warm, open-hearted brother I'd known retreated behind walls of work and emotional distance. He provided materially for Olivia. Their home remained comfortable, her education prioritized, her activities funded, but emotionally he became a ghost in his own life, present but never fully there. Olivia responded by becoming fiercely independent, refusing to show weakness, bottling emotions until they exploded in bursts of teenage rebellion. Only with Maddie did she allow herself vulnerability, their sleepovers becoming safe spaces for the grief she couldn't express elsewhere. "I'm forgetting what she sounded like," she confessed to Maddie 3 years after Elena's death, both girls curled on Maddie's window seat during a thunderstorm. "I can't remember her voice anymore." Maddie, 15 and wise beyond her years, pulled out her phone and played a video I didn't know she had saved. Elena singing a Spanish lullaby while braiding Olivia's hair. The simple gift sparked both tears and healing, another thread in the tapestry of their sisterhood. When David announced they were moving to the city for his new job, both girls were devastated. 3 hours wasn't insurmountable, but it meant an end to their daily togetherness, their casual drop-ins, their shared routines. "We'll still see each other all the time," Olivia promised, helping Maddie pack for one last sleepover in her soon-to-be empty bedroom. "Nothing will change. Not really." For a while, they maintained the illusion. Weekend visits, daily texts, marathon phone calls. But gradually, inevitably, the distance took its toll. Olivia made new friends, joined new activities. The texts became less frequent, the visits more rushed, the phone calls shorter. Then came Vivian and Richard, sweeping into their lives with wealth, social connections, and the promise of belonging to a world David had always admired from afar. Vivian, with her perfect manners and subtle condescension, took one look at David. Handsome, accomplished and vulnerably lonely, and saw potential. Not for love, but for enhancement. A worthy addition to her carefully curated social circle. And Richard, her son, saw in Olivia something equally useful: beauty, intelligence, and a connection to David's architectural expertise, which his family's development company could leverage for their most ambitious project yet. At first, Maddie treated Olivia's stories about country club parties and sailing excursions with wide-eyed interest. She saved up to buy a dress that matched Olivia's new style before a city visit, eager to fit into her cousin's evolving world. But the visit was a disaster, with Olivia's new friends exchanging glances over Maddie's outdated slang and unfamiliarity with the right forks to use at dinner. "Maybe next time you can come to Oak Ridge instead," Maddie suggested on the train. Platform, trying to hide her hurt. "Maybe," Olivia agreed, but her eyes were already scanning her phone, responding to messages from people Maddie didn't know. The engagement came as a shock, not just the fact of it, but the timing. Olivia was barely 20, still in college. Richard, 24, had already taken a vice president position in his family's company, fast-tracked to success without having to earn it. "Aren't they too young?" I asked David over the phone when he called with the news. "Olivia knows what she wants," he replied, pride evident in his voice. And Richard is established, successful. He can give her the security I've always wanted for her. What he didn't say, what he didn't need to say, was that Richard could give Olivia the kind of life Elena would have wanted for her. Privileged, protected, perfect. The kind of life David couldn't provide on his own. What none of us realized then was that the engagement was just the beginning of a carefully orchestrated plan, Richard's plan, to access David's savings and professional reputation through his only daughter. The wedding plans accelerated at a dizzying pace. Vivian hired the best wedding planner in the city, booked the most exclusive venues, assembled a team of designers, florists, and caterers worthy of a celebrity wedding. David, determined to fulfill what he saw as his paternal duty, liquidated investments and emptied savings accounts to fund the extravaganza. "It's worth every penny to see her happy," he told me when I expressed concern about the mounting costs. Elena would have wanted this for her. But would she? The Elena I knew valued sincerity over spectacle, depth over display. She would have questioned the rush, the expense, the growing distance between Olivia and the values she had once held dear. She would have noticed how Olivia's laugh had changed, more practiced, less free. How her eyes now constantly scanned rooms, assessing who was watching, who mattered. Most of all, Elena would have seen what I saw, that Richard never looked at Olivia the way David had looked at Elena, like she was the answer to questions he hadn't even known to ask. The bridal shower debacle was just the most visible symptom of a transformation that had been happening for months. Olivia hadn't just changed her clothes and her speech patterns, she had changed her heart. Or perhaps, more accurately, she had walled it off, packed away the parts of herself that didn't fit into the polished, perfect narrative Vivian had crafted for her. The night after Maddie returned from that disastrous weekend, I found her sitting at our kitchen table, writing furiously in a leather-bound journal, Elena's last gift to her before she died. "What are you working on?" I asked, setting a mug of tea beside her. "A letter," she replied, not looking up. "For Olivia. For the wedding." "A speech?" I asked, confused. She hadn't been asked to participate in the ceremony or reception. "No." Maddie finally met my eyes, her own clear and determined. "Just truth. Sometimes people forget who they are, Mom. Sometimes they need someone to remind them." I wanted to ask more, but something in her expression stopped me. For the first time, I saw not just my child, but the woman she was becoming. Thoughtful, strong, unafraid to stand for what mattered. So instead of questioning, I simply nodded and left her to her writing, the scratch of pen on paper continuing late into the night. The 3 weeks before the wedding passed in a blur of final preparations, mostly observed from afar through social media posts and brief, strained phone calls with David. Olivia didn't reach out to Maddie again, not to apologize, not to check, not to share in the excitement most brides would want to extend to someone who had once been like a sister. "Are you hurt?" I asked Maddie the night before the wedding as she carefully painted her nails a subtle silver to match her dress. "No," she answered after a thoughtful pause. "I'm sad for her." "For Olivia? Why?" Maddie capped the nail polish and blew gently on her fingertips. "Because she's marrying someone who doesn't love her, to please a father who can't see past his grief, to become someone her mother wouldn't recognize." She looked up at me, her eyes somber. "Wouldn't you be sad?" I had no response to that wisdom beyond tears that I quickly blinked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Elena, about promises made and broken, about the powerful pull of belonging and how it can sometimes lead us away from our truest selves. I thought about Maddie's letter, sealed now in its cream envelope, waiting to deliver truths that might not be welcomed. More than anything, I thought about courage, not the dramatic, cinematic kind, but the quiet, steady courage it takes to speak truth with love, even when it costs you, even when it hurts. even when no one thanks you for it. Maddie had that courage. She'd always had it, this daughter of mine who noticed everything, who felt deeply but judged rarely, who extended grace to those who hadn't earned it. Including her cousin. Including me. As dawn broke on the wedding day, I made a silent promise to Elena, wherever she was. I would support Maddie, whatever happened. I would stand by her side as she did what I hadn't found the courage to do. Speak. The truth before it was too late. What I didn't know then, what I couldn't have anticipated, was how that truth, delivered in Maddie's careful handwriting on cream stationery, would ripple outward, changing not just one day or one marriage, but the course of all our lives. I didn't know that by sunset everything would be different. That relationships would be redefined, illusions shattered, new beginnings forged from the wreckage of carefully constructed facades. I didn't know that my quiet, observant daughter would become the unexpected hero of a story no one saw coming. Not with raised voice or dramatic gesture, but with the simple, devastating power of words written with love and delivered with courage. I didn't know that sometimes being called the Maid is just the beginning of a much larger story, one that ends not with humiliation, but with redemption. As the reception progressed into the evening, the atmosphere transformed from formal elegance to celebratory abandon. The string quartet had been replaced by a live band, playing upbeat covers that drew guests to the dance floor. Crystal champagne flutes clinked as toasts were made. Laughter echoed beneath the soaring ceilings, and the carefully orchestrated timeline of the wedding planner began to loosen under the influence of open bars and genuine joy. I watched from our table as Olivia moved through the crowd, radiant in her designer gown, accepting embraces and well wishes with practiced grace. To anyone else, she looked like the epitome of bridal bliss, young, beautiful, stepping confidently into her future. But I knew her well enough, had loved her long enough, to see the shadow behind her smile, the way her eyes kept darting to David for reassurance, to Vivian for approval. "She hasn't read it yet," Maddie observed quietly, nursing the sparkling cider that had been poured for underage guests. Her eyes never left her cousin, tracking Olivia's movements across the reception hall with the careful attention she'd always given to those she loved. "Maybe she won't," I suggested gently, not wanting Maddie to be disappointed. "It's her wedding day. There's a lot happening." Maddie shook her head, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. "She'll read it. Olivia always keeps her promises." I wasn't as confident. The Olivia we'd known, the one who built sandcastles with Maddie until sunset, who crawled into bed with her after nightmares, who whispered, "sisters by choice," like a sacred vow, seemed to have disappeared beneath layers of tool and social ambition. But I nodded anyway, unwilling to dim the quiet determination in my daughter's eyes. Across the reception hall, Richard was holding court with a group of older men, business associates of his father's, judging by their expensive suits and serious expressions. I watched as he gestured expansively, his handsome face animated, confident. Beside him stood a young man I recognized as Alex, the groomsman Maddie had mentioned overhearing in the kitchen. He nodded along with Richard's words, occasionally adding something that made the group laugh appreciatively. "That's him," Maddie murmured, following my gaze. "Alex, the one who asked if Olivia was worth it." A surge of protective anger rose in my chest. These men were discussing business at a wedding reception, probably the very real estate deal that would use David's investment, Olivia's inheritance from Elena, in essence, to line their own pockets. And the groom wasn't even pretending to miss his bride while he did it. "I need some air," I said suddenly, pushing back from the table. The opulence of the reception, the false smiles, the calculated movements, it all felt suffocating, a beautiful facade hiding ugly truths. Maddie stood to join me, but just then, David appeared at our table, slightly flushed from dancing in champagne. "There you two are. I've been looking everywhere." He dropped into an empty chair beside me, loosening, his bow tie with one finger. Some party, huh? Elena would have loved this. The mention of his late wife's name sent a pang through me. Would she? I asked softly, unable to stop myself. All this extravagance? David's smile faltered slightly. What do you mean? Nothing, I backpedaled, not wanting to spoil his happiness. It's beautiful. Everything is beautiful. He relaxed, patting my hand affectionately. It is, isn't it? And Olivia, she looks just like her mother. Same smile, same eyes. His voice caught. I just wish Elena could see her. See how well she turned out. Maddie spoke up, her voice gentle but direct. Uncle David, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Anything. Do you know what's in the prenuptial agreement? The one Olivia signed? David blinked, surprised by the question. Well, not the details, no, that's between them. Richard's family insisted, which is standard in their circles. Assets to protect and all that. He waved a hand dismissively. Why do you ask? Maddie hesitated, glancing at me. I nodded, slightly encouraging her. If anyone deserved to know the truth, it was David. I overheard Richard talking to Alex at the bridal shower, she began carefully. About the agreement, and about your investment in their house. David's expression shifted from confusion to concern. What about it? Before Maddie could continue, a sharp voice cut through our conversation. David, there you are. Vivian appeared beside our table, resplendent in her designer gown, diamonds glittering at her throat and ears. The photographer wants some family photos by the fountain. Richard's father is waiting. Her gaze slid dismissively over Maddie and me, before returning to David. Now, please. David stood automatically, years of social conditioning kicking in. We'll finish this conversation later, he promised Maddie, then followed Vivian across the ballroom without a backward glance. He's not going to listen, I said gently, watching him go. Not tonight. He's too happy, too proud of her. Maddie nodded, a determined glint in her eye. That's why I wrote the letter. It's not just for Olivia. It's for all of us. As the night progressed, I lost track of Olivia amid the swirl of dancing guests and flashing cameras. The band played on, the champagne flowed, and the perfect wedding continued its perfect trajectory toward the grand exit planned for midnight. The newlyweds to depart in a vintage Rolls-Royce, sparklers lighting their path to a waiting helicopter that would whisk them to a private airfield where their flight to Bora Bora awaited. Everything proceeding exactly as planned, exactly as purchased. It was nearing 11 when I spotted Olivia again. She had slipped away from the main celebration and stood alone on the terrace outside the ballroom, the soft glow of string lights illuminating her profile. Without her audience, her shoulders had dropped, her smile faded. She looked tired, uncertain, and achingly young. She's reading it, Maddie whispered beside me, and sure enough, I saw the cream envelope in Olivia's hands, the pages inside now unfolded. As we watched, she began to read, her brow furrowing, her free hand rising to her throat where Elena's pearl pendant rested. Should we go to her? I asked, uncertain of the letter's contents, of how Olivia might react. Maddie shook her head. No, she needs to read it alone. We watched as Olivia turned a page, then another. Her hand trembled visibly even from a distance. When she reached what must have been the final page, she pressed it to her chest, her eyes closing tightly. A single tear traced down her cheek, catching the light before falling to the terrace floor. For a long moment, she stood motionless, head bowed over the letter. Then, with deliberate movements, she folded the pages, returned them to their envelope, and tucked it into the hidden pocket of her wedding gown. She straightened her shoulders, wiped her eyes, and turned back toward the reception, only to find Richard standing in the doorway, watching her with an unreadable expression. "What's that?" he asked, nodding toward her pocket, his voice carrying, clearly in the night air. Olivia startled. "Just a letter, from Maddie." "Your charity case cousin?" Richard scoffed, moving closer. "What could she possibly have to say that's got you crying on our wedding night?" Something hardened in Olivia's face, a flicker of the strong-willed girl she had once been, the one who stood up to playground bullies and defended Maddie fiercely when other children mocked her thrift store clothes. "Don't call her that," she said, her voice low but firm. "She's family." Richard rolled his eyes, reaching for her arm. "Whatever. The photographer wants more shots before we change for the exit. Vivian's waiting." But Olivia didn't move. "Did you read the prenuptial agreement before I signed it? All of it?" The question hung in the air between them, unexpected and dangerous. Richard's expression shifted, annoyance giving way to wariness. "What? Of course. It's standard protection, Liv. We've been through this." "Have we?" She withdrew the letter from her pocket, holding it between them like a shield. "Because according to this, you and your father added clauses about my dad's investment in our house. Clauses that weren't in the version you showed me." Richard's face hardened, charm falling away to reveal something colder, more calculated. "Let me see that." He reached for the letter, but Olivia stepped back, keeping it from his grasp. "Maddie overheard you," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "At the bridal shower. Talking to Alex about the commission you'd get from my dad's investment. About whether I was worth it." Richard's laugh was dismissive, but his eyes darted nervously toward the reception, checking who might be listening. "Your little cousin has an overactive imagination, and frankly, she sounds jealous." "That's what your mother said." Olivia nodded slowly. "That's what I thought too. But then I asked my dad about those clauses just now, and he had no idea what I was talking about. He never read the final version either." A muscle ticked in Richard's jaw. "This is ridiculous. It's our wedding night, Olivia. You're making a scene over nothing." "Am I?" Olivia's voice rose slightly. "Then explain why the agreement gives you control of my inheritance if the marriage ends for any reason. Explain why it specifically mentions the development deal with Harrington Properties as an exempt asset in case of divorce." "Lower your voice," Richard hissed, glancing over his shoulder. "People can hear you." "Good." Something had changed in Olivia's demeanor, a transformation happening before our eyes. The polished socialite facade was cracking, revealing glimpses of the authentic, fierce girl who had been buried beneath. Let them all hear how you and your family tried to use me to get to my father's money." Richard grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the delicate lace of her sleeve. "You're being hysterical. You had too much champagne." "No," Olivia said, pulling free with a forcefulness that seemed to surprise them both. "For the first time in years, I'm thinking clearly." She held up the letter. "Maddie reminded me who I am. Who I was before all of this, before I let myself become someone my mother wouldn't recognize." The mention of Elena seemed to hit Richard like a physical blow. He stepped back, his handsome face twisting with confusion, then anger. "Your mother?" he scoffed. "The woman's been dead for years, Olivia. You barely remember her." I felt Maddie tense beside me, a small gasp escaping her lips. Even from a distance, we could see the impact of those cruel words. Olivia flinching as though struck, her hand rising to the pearl pendant at her throat. For a moment, silence stretched between the couple. Then Olivia straightened, something resolute and fierce settling over her features. "I remember enough," she said, her voice steady. "I remember that she loved me for who I was, not what I could bring to someone's balance sheet." She turned away from Richard, toward the doors leading back to the reception, only to find that a small crowd had gathered, wedding guests drawn by the escalating tension, now watching with undisguised interest as the fairy tale unraveled before them. At the front stood David, his face pale, eyes moving between his daughter and his new son-in-law with growing comprehension. Beside him, Vivian was already in damage control mode, offering tight smiles and murmured explanations to nearby guests. "Olivia," David said, stepping forward. "What's happening?" Olivia looked at her father, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years, and saw what I had always seen, a man so wounded by grief that he had mistaken expensive trappings for genuine care, a father so desperate to give his daughter what he thought Elena would have wanted that he had failed to see what Elena had actually valued. "Dad," Olivia said, her voice breaking slightly, "I need to show you something." She held out Maddie's letter, her hand trembling but determined. Before David could respond, Richard stepped between them. "This is all a misunderstanding," he said, smoothly, the charming mask sliding back into place. "Wedding day jitters, too much champagne, nothing to worry about." He reached for Olivia's arm again. "Let's just get back to the celebration, shall we?" But David's attention had shifted, his focus zeroing in on Richard's hand gripping his daughter's arm, on the barely concealed anger in his son-in-law's face, on the letter Olivia was trying to show him. "Let go of my daughter," he said quietly, a father's protective instinct finally overriding social niceties and expensive obligations. Richard hesitated, clearly weighing his options. The crowd had grown larger, witnesses to a moment rapidly spiraling, beyond containment. With visible reluctance, he released Olivia's arm, stepping back with a tight smile. "Just trying to keep things on schedule," he said lightly. "The photographer is waiting." But David wasn't listening anymore. He had taken the letter from Olivia and was reading quickly, his expression darkening with each line. When he looked up, the genial host, the proud father, the grieving widower, all were gone, replaced by a man confronting a betrayal so profound it had nearly cost him everything that mattered. "Is this true?" he asked Richard, his voice dangerously calm. "Did you alter the prenuptial agreement to gain control of my investment?" Richard's father appeared suddenly, inserting himself into the confrontation with practiced ease. "Now, David, let's not make a scene. These are complex legal matters, not suitable for discussion at a wedding reception. Why don't we all—" "Answer the question," David interrupted, his eyes never leaving Richard's face. "Is this true?" The silence stretched, taut with tension. Around us, guests shifted uncomfortably, sensing that they were witnessing not just a family disagreement, but the collapse of a carefully constructed facade. It was Alex, surprisingly, who finally broke the stalemate. He stepped forward from the edge of the crowd, his expression a mix of discomfort and resolve. "It's true," he said, avoiding Richard's glare. "All of it. The modified agreement, the commission setup, the plan to secure control of the investment property." He swallowed hard. "I have copies of everything, in case things went south." The admission sent a ripple through the gathered witnesses. Vivian made a small, distressed sound, reaching for her husband's arm, but he shook her off, his attention fixed on his son. "Richard," he said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Is this how I raised you to conduct business?" Richard's confident facade finally cracked. "It was your idea," he hissed. "You said David's architectural reputation was worth more than his investment, that we needed both to secure the Morgan Heights contract." The accusation hung in the air, damning in its specificity, its unplanned truth. Richard's father blanched, then reddened, caught in a lie too public to deny. In the silence that followed, I felt Maddie move past me, stepping forward from the shadows where we had been watching. She moved quietly to Olivia's side, not saying anything, just standing beside her cousin as she had always done, through skinned knees and first heartbreaks, through Elena's funeral and adolescent struggles. Sisters by choice. Olivia turned to her, surprise giving way to recognition, to a flood of emotion too complex for words. Without hesitation, she reached for Maddie's hand, gripping it tightly. "You knew," she whispered. All this time you knew what was happening. To me. Maddie shook her head. I just remembered who you are, she said simply. Who we are. The moment stretched between them, years of distance collapsing in the face of a truth more powerful than social ambition, more binding than blood. The choice to see and be seen, to stand beside those who matter, even when it costs you. Then David was moving, his voice raised as he confronted Richard's father, demanding answers, threatening legal action. Vivian was attempting damage control, ushering guests away with practiced smiles and whispered assurances. Richard stood frozen, his perfect wedding, his perfect plan, disintegrating around him. But in the center of the storm, Olivia and Maddie remained still, hands clasped, a small island of authenticity amid the chaos of falling facades. I'm sorry, Olivia said, her voice cracking. For everything, for how I treated you, for forgetting. Maddie's answer was simple, direct, the truth she had always offered, even when it wasn't wanted. You're here now. That's what matters. I watched my daughter, my wise, brave, compassionate daughter, offer forgiveness without being asked, extend grace without conditions. I watched her cousin, once lost in a maze of others' expectations, find her way back through the steady beacon of that grace. And I realized that the turning point had never really been the letter itself. It had been the moment Maddie decided to write it, not in anger or retribution, but in love. The moment she chose to believe that the cousin she had grown up with, the girl who had once promised to be her sister, still existed somewhere beneath the carefully constructed persona of the perfect bride. The moment she decided that truth, offered with love, was worth the risk of rejection. As the reception dissolved around us, guests departing in murmured confusion, the wedding planner frantically trying to salvage some semblance of the planned exit, Richard and his family huddled in tense conversation with their lawyers. Olivia turned to her father, still clutching Maddie's hand. Dad, she said, her voice stronger now, I think I need to go home. David looked at his daughter, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years, and nodded slowly. Yes, he agreed, something like recognition dawning in his eyes. I think we all do. In the chaos of the moment, in the wreckage of elaborate plans and exposed lies, something simple and true had emerged. The recognition that home isn't always a place. Sometimes it's the people who know you best, who love you anyway, who remind you who you are when you've forgotten. That night, as expensive floral arrangements wilted and champagne grew warm in abandoned glasses, as gossip rippled through departing guests and damage control began in panicked phone calls, 4 people quietly left the Grand Hotel through a side entrance: a father, a daughter, an aunt, a cousin. Not the exit that had been planned, photographed, coordinated to perfection. But perhaps, in ways that mattered most, it was the truest beginning of all. We left the Grand Plaza Hotel through a service entrance, guided by a sympathetic kitchen worker who had witnessed the confrontation on the terrace. Outside, the night air hit us like a cleansing wave, washing away the cloying scent of expensive flowers and pretense. David looked shell-shocked, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck, his carefully styled hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. Olivia had gathered her elaborate train over one arm, her other hand still firmly clasped, in Maddie's, as if afraid her cousin might disappear if she let go. My car is this way, I said quietly, gesturing toward the parking garage across the street. None of us had planned for an early departure. The original schedule had us celebrating until midnight. I can't believe I almost, Olivia began, then stopped, her voice catching. How did I not see it? Because you weren't supposed to, Maddie replied simply. That was the whole point. We walked in silence through the nearly empty parking garage, our footsteps echoing against concrete walls. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, the contrast between Olivia's couture wedding gown and our current circumstances seemed almost surreal. A fairy tale princess suddenly stranded in a mundane reality. "What happens now?" David asked as we reached. My modest sedan, his voice hollow with the weight of realization. The gifts, the guests, the vendors, everything we paid for. "Now we go home," I said firmly, unlocking the car. "The rest can wait until tomorrow." Home turned out to be my brother's city apartment, a sleek two-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Despite its modernist design and prime location, it had never felt particularly welcoming, more like a stylish hotel suite than a lived-in space. But that night, as we gathered in the living room still dressed in our wedding finery, it became a sanctuary of sorts, a private space to process the public unraveling we had just experienced. David moved on autopilot, hanging up his tuxedo jacket, placing his keys in the ceramic dish by the door, pouring himself a generous measure of scotch from a crystal decanter, the rituals of normalcy in the face of extraordinary circumstances. Olivia disappeared into her bedroom and emerged minutes later transformed, wedding gown exchanged for sweatpants and an oversized university sweatshirt, elaborate updo released, into a messy ponytail, makeup scrubbed away to reveal the freckles she had diligently concealed for years. Without the trappings of the perfect bride, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but also more authentic than she had in months. "There you are," Maddie said softly, a smile of recognition lighting her face. "I've missed you." Olivia's composure finally broke. She sank onto the couch beside her cousin and buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Maddie wrapped her arms around her, resting her cheek against Olivia's hair, murmuring quiet reassurances too low for the rest of us to hear. I moved to the kitchen, giving them space, busying myself with making tea, another ritual of normalcy in the face of crisis. David joined me, leaning heavily against the counter, his expression dazed. "How did I not see it?" he asked, unconsciously echoing his daughter's earlier question. "They were using her to get to me, using us both. You saw what you wanted." "To see," I answered gently, "what you thought Elena would have wanted for her." He flinched at the mention of his late wife's name. Elena would never have let this happen. She would have seen through them immediately. "Maybe," I allowed, measuring loose tea into a pot. "But she would have understood why you didn't. You wanted the best for Olivia. You always have." "The best," he repeated bitterly. "I thought that meant the most prestigious, the most secure. I thought it meant giving her the kind of life Elena and I had planned together." He dragged a hand down his face. "But I wasn't really doing it for Olivia, was I? I was doing it for Elena, for the ghost of everything we lost." The realization hung between us, painful in its accuracy. For years, David had been trying to fulfill promises made to a woman who was no longer there to release him from them, attempting to create a perfect life for his daughter not because it was what she needed, but because it was what he imagined her mother would have wanted. "You know what the worst part is?" he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I can't even remember the last time I asked Olivia what she wanted. What would make her happy? I just assumed." He trailed off, the weight of years of assumptions hanging in the unfinished sentence. "It's not too late," I told him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "She's still here. You both are." In the living room, the girls' conversation had shifted, quiet sobs giving way to murmured exchanges occasionally punctuated by watery laughter. The sound was achingly familiar, the same intimate cadence that had filled so many sleepovers, so many late-night talks on the porch swing, so many shared secrets over the years. Sisters finding their way back to each other. I carried a tray of tea into the living room, setting it on the coffee table before the girls. Olivia looked up, her face tear-stained but somehow lighter, as if a burden had been set down. "Thank you," she said, and I knew she wasn't referring to the tea. Maddie reached for the cream envelope that had been set aside on the coffee table, the I letter that had changed everything. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you directly," she said to Olivia. I tried at the bridal shower, but I wouldn't have listened, Olivia finished for her. I know. That's why the letter was perfect. You knew I'd read it alone, that I'd have space to really hear you. She shook her head in wonder. You still know me better than anyone, even after everything. What exactly did the letter say? David asked, joining us in the living room, his scotch untouched. Maddie glanced at Olivia, a silent question passing between them. Olivia nodded, giving permission. First, I reminded her who she used to be, Maddie explained, her voice steady and clear. All the memories we shared, the promises we made, the things Aunt Elena taught us about honesty and courage. She looked down at her hands. Then I told her what I overheard Richard saying at the bridal shower, about the prenup, about the commission, about whether she was worth it. David's jaw tightened, fresh anger flashing in his eyes, but he remained silent, listening. I told her I'd looked up the development project they were planning. It's all public record. The property they were using your investment for is in Morgan Heights. Maddie turned to David. The old industrial district they're converting to luxury condos. With your name attached as architect, they secured permits that had been denied 3 times before. David closed his eyes briefly, the full extent of the manipulation becoming clear. His reputation, his investment, his daughter, all leveraged for profit. We left the Grand Plaza Hotel through a service entrance, guided by a sympathetic kitchen worker who had witnessed the confrontation on the terrace. Outside, the night air hit us like a cleansing wave, washing away the cloying scent of expensive flowers and pretense. David looked shell-shocked, his bow tie hanging loose around his neck, his carefully styled hair disheveled from running his hands through it repeatedly. Olivia had gathered her elaborate train over one arm, her other hand still firmly clasped, in Maddie's, as if afraid her cousin might disappear if she let go. My car is this way, I said quietly, gesturing toward the parking garage across the street. None of us had planned for an early departure. The original schedule had us celebrating until midnight. I can't believe I almost... Olivia began, then stopped, her voice catching. How did I not see it? Because you weren't supposed to, Maddie replied simply. That was the whole point. We walked in silence through the nearly empty parking garage, our footsteps echoing against concrete walls. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, the contrast between Olivia's couture wedding gown and our current circumstances seemed almost surreal, a fairy tale princess suddenly stranded in a mundane reality. What happens now? David asked as we reached my modest sedan, his voice hollow with the weight of realization. The gifts, the guests, the vendors, everything we paid for. Now we go home, I said firmly, unlocking the car. The rest can wait until tomorrow. Home turned out to be my brother's city apartment, a sleek 2-bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. Despite its modernist design and prime location, it had never felt particularly welcoming, more like a stylish hotel suite than a lived-in space. But that night, as we gathered in the living room still dressed in our wedding finery, it became a sanctuary of sorts, a private space to process the public unraveling we had just experienced. David moved on autopilot, hanging up his tuxedo jacket, placing his keys in the ceramic dish by the door, pouring himself a generous measure of scotch from a crystal decanter. The rituals of normalcy in the face of extraordinary circumstances. Olivia disappeared into her bedroom and emerged minutes later transformed. Wedding gown exchanged for sweatpants and an oversized university sweatshirt, elaborate updo released, into a messy ponytail, makeup scrubbed away to reveal the freckles she had diligently concealed for years. Without the trappings of the perfect bride, she looked younger, more vulnerable, but also more authentic than she had in months. There you are, Maddie said softly, a smile of recognition lighting her face. I've missed you. Olivia's composure finally broke. She sank onto the couch beside her cousin and buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Maddie wrapped her arms around her, resting her cheek against Olivia's hair, murmuring quiet reassurances too low for the rest of us to hear. I moved to the kitchen, giving them space, busying myself with making tea, another ritual of normalcy in the face of crisis. David joined me, leaning heavily against the counter, his expression dazed. "How did I not see it?" he asked, unconsciously echoing his daughter's earlier question. "They were using her to get to me, using us both. You saw what you wanted to see," I answered gently. "What you thought Elena would have wanted for her." He flinched at the mention of his late wife's name. Elena would never have let this happen. She would have seen through them immediately. "Maybe," I allowed, measuring loose tea into a pot. "But she would have understood why you didn't. You wanted the best for Olivia. You always have." "The best," he repeated bitterly. "I thought that meant the most prestigious, the most secure. I thought it meant giving her the kind of life Elena and I had planned together." He dragged a hand down his face. "But I wasn't really doing it for Olivia, was I? I was doing it for Elena, for the ghost of everything we lost." The realization hung between us, painful in its accuracy. For years, David had been trying to fulfill promises made to a woman who was no longer there to release him from them, attempting to create a perfect life for his daughter, not because it was what she needed, but because it was what he imagined her mother would have wanted. "You know what the worst part is?" he continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I can't even remember the last time I asked Olivia what she wanted. What would make her happy? I just assumed." He trailed off, the weight of years of assumptions hanging in the unfinished sentence. "It's not too late," I told him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "She's still here. You both are." In the living room, the girls' conversation had shifted, quiet sobs giving way to murmured exchanges occasionally punctuated by watery laughter. The sound was achingly familiar, the same intimate cadence that had filled so many sleepovers, so many late-night talks on the porch swing, so many shared secrets over the years, sisters finding their way back to each other. I carried a tray of tea into the living room, setting it on the coffee table before the girls. Olivia looked up, her face tear-stained but somehow lighter, as if a burden had been set down. "Thank you," she said, and I knew she wasn't referring to the tea. Maddie reached for the cream envelope that had been set aside on the coffee table, the letter that had changed everything. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you directly," she said to Olivia. "I tried at the bridal shower, but I wouldn't have listened," Olivia finished for her. "I know. That's why the letter was perfect. You knew I'd read it alone, that I'd have space to really hear you." She shook her head in wonder. "You still know me better than anyone, even after everything." "What exactly did the letter say?" David asked, joining us in the living room, his scotch untouched. Maddie glanced at Olivia, a silent question passing between them. Olivia nodded, giving permission. "First, I reminded her who she used to be," Maddie explained, her voice steady and clear. "All the memories we shared, the promises we made, the things Aunt Elena taught us about honesty and courage." She looked down at her hands. "Then I told her what I overheard Richard saying at the bridal shower, about the prenup, about the commission, about whether she was worth it." David's jaw tightened, fresh anger flashing in his eyes, but he remained silent, listening. "I told her I'd looked up the development project they were planning. It's all public record. The property they were using your investment for is in Morgan Heights." Maddie turned to David. "The old industrial district they're converting to luxury condos. With your name attached as architect, they secured permits that had been denied 3 times before." David closed his eyes briefly, the full extent of the manipulation becoming clear. His reputation, his investment, his daughter, all leveraged for profit. "But that wasn't really the important part of the letter," Maddie continued, her voice softening. The most important part was reminding Olivia that she has always been enough, exactly as she is. That she doesn't need designer clothes or country club memberships, or a wealthy husband to be worthy of love. Olivia reached for her cousin's hand, squeezing it tightly. "You said that I was turning into someone my mother wouldn't recognize," she said, her voice catching. That hit me hardest because I knew it was true. I've spent so long trying to be what everyone else wanted that I forgot who I actually am. "And who is that?" David asked quietly, a genuine question from a father who had perhaps forgotten as well. Olivia looked up at him, really looked at him, perhaps for the first time in years. "I'm not sure anymore, Dad. But I want to find out. Not as Richard's wife or Vivian's project, or even as the daughter you think Mom would have wanted." She took a deep breath. "Just as me. Just as Olivia." The simple declaration hung in the air, both an ending and a beginning. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of elaborate plans and extravagant dreams, something essential and genuine had been reclaimed, the permission to be authentically oneself, flawed and unfinished and real. We talked long into the night, the four of us, moving from tea to hot chocolate, from the living room to the kitchen and back again, from tears to laughter and back to tears. There were practical matters to discuss, the legal aftermath of the aborted wedding, the return of gifts, the untangling of finances. But beneath the logistics ran a deeper current of reconnection, of bridges being rebuilt between father and daughter, between cousins who had once been as close as sisters, between the people we had become and the people we had once been. Dawn was breaking when Maddie and I finally prepared to leave, the first hints of pink and gold touching the river visible through the apartment windows. Olivia walked us to the door, her eyes red-rimmed but clear, her shoulders straighter than they had been in months. "I don't know how to thank you," she said to Maddie, pulling her into a fierce hug, "for remembering who I was when I forgot, for being brave enough to tell me the truth." "You'd have done the same for me," Maddie replied simply. "That's what family does. The real kind, not the kind you dress up for photographs." Olivia laughed, a genuine sound without the practiced cadence that had characterized her social persona in recent months. "Speaking of which," she said, reaching for something on the entryway table, "I want you to have this." She pressed a small velvet box into Maddie's hands. Inside lay Elena's pearl pendant, the one Olivia had worn throughout the wedding as her something old. "But this was your mom's," Maddie protested. "You always said you'd wear it on your wedding day." "And I did," Olivia said softly. "But I think she'd want you to have it now. You're the one who remembered what she taught us. You're the one who was brave enough to speak the truth, even when it was hard." Her voice caught. "You're more like her than I am, in all the ways that matter." Tears welled in Maddie's eyes as she closed her fingers around the pendant. "I'll take care of it until you're ready to wear it again," she promised. On a day that would make her proud. The months that followed were not easy. The scandal of the aborted wedding made its way through social circles, embellished with each telling. Richard's family attempted damage control, first with threats of legal action, then with offers of settlement to avoid public exposure of their scheme. David, rediscovering the backbone that grief had softened, declined both, instead hiring a forensic accountant to untangle the web of financial manipulation they had almost succeeded in creating. Olivia moved back to Oak Ridge temporarily, taking a leave of absence from her senior year of college to reassess the path she had been following. She spent long hours on our porch swing, sometimes alone with her thoughts, sometimes deep in conversation with Maddie, sometimes simply watching. The fireflies emerge at dusk, rediscovering the simple pleasures that had once defined her life before designer labels and social ambitions. "I don't know what I want to do next," she confessed one evening, as the three of us sat on the porch, sharing a pitcher of lemonade and watching lightning bugs rise from the tall grass at the edge of the yard. "Everything I thought I was working, Toward wasn't really mine to begin with. That's okay, Maddie reassured her, legs tucked beneath her on the swing. You don't have to have it all figured out right away. But you do, Olivia pointed out, a hint of envy in her voice. You've always known you wanted to study environmental law, that you wanted to make a difference. Maddie shrugged, modest, in the face of her clear vision. That's just my path. Yours might be different, might take longer to find. That doesn't make it any less valuable. I watched them together, these young women on the cusp of adulthood, and marveled at the wisdom they had forged through adversity. Maddie, steadfast in her knowledge of who she was and what mattered to her. Olivia, humbled by her brush with false values, now courageously facing the blank canvas of reinvention. David visited often, driving the 3 hours from the city every weekend. I watched him rediscover his daughter, not as a project or a continuation of Elena's legacy, but as her own person, with her own dreams and fears and quirks. I watched him learn to listen again, to see her clearly, to follow her lead instead of always assuming he knew what was best. She's thinking about switching her major, he told me one Sunday afternoon as we watched the girls tending the vegetable. Garden together, sleeves rolled up, dirt under their fingernails, laughing at some private joke. From business to education, says she might want to teach. Like Elena, I observed, remembering how his late wife had loved her work as an elementary school teacher, how alive she had been in a classroom full of children. Yes, he agreed softly, but not because that's what Elena did, because it's what calls to her. He smiled, a simple expression of genuine pride. I think she'll be wonderful at it. She will, I agreed, and more importantly, she'll be herself. A year after the wedding that wasn't, I watched Olivia stand nervously before a classroom of third graders during her first student teaching assignment. She had indeed switched her major to elementary education, discovering a natural gift for connecting with children that surprised no one who had known her mother. The journey hadn't been easy. She'd had to extend her graduation timeline, take additional courses, admit to her academic advisor that the path she'd been following wasn't truly her own. But now, watching her kneel beside a small boy struggling, with his reading, her face alive with the same patient compassion I'd once seen in Elena, I knew she had found her way home to herself. She looks just like Mom did, David murmured beside me as we observed through the classroom door's small window. We'd both come to support her on this milestone day, this step toward a future of her own choosing. She does, I agreed. But more importantly, she sounds like herself again. The aftermath of the wedding scandal had eventually faded, as all gossip does when something more sensational takes its place. Richard's family had suffered some professional setbacks when their business tactics came under scrutiny, but they remained wealthy and influential. Richard himself had quickly become engaged to the daughter of another business associate, the wedding announcement appearing in the society pages just 6 months after his failed marriage to Olivia. Does it bother you? Maddie had asked Olivia when they saw the announcement together. Olivia had considered the question thoughtfully. Not in the way you might think, she finally answered. I feel sorry for her, and grateful that it's not me. That gratitude manifested in Olivia's renewed commitment to authenticity. She sold most of the designer clothes and accessories that had formed her society wardrobe, using the money to pay for her additional education courses and to start a small scholarship fund for first-generation college students at her university. She deleted her carefully curated social media accounts with their thousands of followers and started fresh with just one private account where she shared genuine moments with actual friends. Most significantly, she began volunteering at a grief support group for children who had lost parents, channeling her own experience of loss into something healing for others. It was there that she met Connor, a young psychologist who specialized in childhood trauma. Their friendship developed slowly, built on shared values and genuine connection rather than social ambition or family pressure. He makes me laugh, she told Maddie during one of their regular Sunday phone calls, now that Olivia had moved back to the city to finish her degree. Not the polite laugh I used around Richard's friends, but the kind where you snort and don't care how you look. The best kind, Maddie agreed, smiling at the happiness in her cousin's voice. Maddie's own path had continued steadily forward. She had been accepted to her first-choice university with a partial scholarship, supplemented by the money she had saved from years of part-time jobs. Her dream of studying environmental law remained clear, fueled by a summer internship at a nonprofit focused on protecting local watersheds. The quiet strength that had always characterized her had blossomed into confident purpose, her gentle persistence now recognized as its own form of power. The pendant that Olivia had given her that night after the wedding remained in its velvet box, carefully preserved until the day it could return to its rightful owner. But Maddie wore a different memento daily, a simple bracelet of twisted silver that Elena had given her for her 10th birthday, a reminder of the woman who had taught both girls the value of speaking truth with love. 6 months after Olivia's first student teaching assignment, we gathered in my backyard to celebrate Maddie's 19th birthday. The occasion was simple by design. Strings of lights in the trees, a homemade cake, gifts wrapped in repurposed paper, friends and neighbors crowded around picnic tables laden with potluck dishes. No extravagance, no pretense, no performances for social media, just genuine connection, just joy for its own sake. As the evening progressed, I found myself sitting on the porch steps with David, watching Olivia and Maddie sprawled on a blanket in the yard, pointing out constellations to each other in the darkening sky. The scene might have been from years ago, before grief and ambition and social climbing pulled them in separate directions, before they lost and found each other again. "I've been thinking a lot about courage lately," David said quietly, his gaze never leaving the girls. Not the dramatic kind, running into burning buildings or facing physical danger. The quiet kind. The kind Maddie showed when she wrote that letter, knowing she might lose Olivia forever, but telling the truth anyway. I nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. The courage to be authentic even when it costs you, to speak truth even when it isn't wanted. Elena had that kind of courage, he continued. I'd forgotten that about her. I'd polished her memory into this perfect, untouchable ideal, but she was fearlessly honest. She would have seen through Richard and Vivian immediately. He smiled ruefully. She would have shut down the whole charade before it began. Probably, I agreed with a soft laugh. But then we might have missed the lesson. What lesson is that? I considered the question, watching Maddie trace the outline of Cassiopeia with her finger, Olivia following the movement with her eyes. That sometimes the most valuable gift we can give each other is the truth, not wielded as a weapon, but offered as an act of love. I turned to look at my brother, and that it's never too late to remember who you really are. David's eyes glistened in the soft glow of the porch light. I'm trying, he said simply. We all are, I assured him. That's the point. One afternoon, several months later, the 4 of us gathered at Elena's grave, a ritual we had performed separately for years but never together. It was the anniversary of her death, a day that had once been marked only by silence and private grief. But Olivia had suggested that this year, we face it together, bringing wildflowers picked from the meadow where she and Maddie had played as children. We stood in a small semicircle around the simple headstone, the spring sun warm on our shoulders, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of new growth. David placed his bouquet first, kneeling to brush away leaves from the base of the stone. Olivia followed, then Maddie, then me, each adding our flowers to the colorful tribute. I used to come here and talk to her about all my plans, Olivia said softly, her hand resting on the smooth granite. About the perfect life I thought I needed to build to make her proud. She smiled, a touch of sadness mingling with newfound peace. Now I just tell her about my day, about the kids in my classroom, about what made me laugh. That would make her happiest, David confirmed, his own grief now tempered with acceptance, with the ability to remember joy alongside the pain of loss. As we turned to leave, Olivia reached for something in her pocket, a small velvet box that I recognized. Immediately, she handed it to Maddie, who opened it to find Elena's pearl pendant nestled inside. "It's time," Olivia said simply. "I want you to have it. Permanently." Maddie shook her head. "I was just keeping it safe for you. For your real wedding day." "I know," Olivia smiled. "But it belongs with the person who truly carries Mom's spirit. Her courage, her honesty, her willingness to fight for what matters." She closed Maddie's fingers around the box. "That's you." Tears welled in Maddie's eyes, but she didn't argue further. Instead, she removed the pendant from its box and held it out to me. "Help me put it on?" As I fastened the delicate chain around my daughter's neck, I felt the circle of our shared story closing, grief transforming into wisdom, loss yielding to new connections, pretense giving way to authentic living. The pendant gleamed in the spring sunlight, a testament to legacy, not of wealth or status, but of courage and truth. Later that night, after everyone had gone and the house was quiet, I found myself thinking about that moment at the bridal shower, when Olivia's transformation had seemed complete, when Maddie had been dismissed as the maid rather than embraced as family. I thought about how names can wound, how labels can diminish, how casual cruelty can ripple outward in ways the speaker never intends. But I also thought about how that moment of hurt had ultimately led to healing, not just for Maddie, but for all of us. How sometimes the very things meant to diminish us become catalysts for growth, for reclamation, for return to our truest selves. The most powerful act of service we can offer those we love is to remind them who they truly are when the world has confused them, when they have lost their way, when they have forgotten. To clean away the debris that obscures their authentic selves. To polish the tarnished places until their genuine nature shines through again. To restore order to the rooms of their hearts when others have left them in disarray. To be, in the most profound sense of the word, their maid. That night, as stars wheeled overhead and the quiet rhythms of small-town life continued around us, I said a silent prayer of gratitude for my daughter's courage, for her cousin's homecoming, for my brother's awakening, for my own journey from anger to understanding. And yes, even for the woman who had thoughtlessly called Maddie the maid at her cousin's wedding. She had meant it as dismissal, as categorization, as subtle cruelty. She could not have known she was bestowing a title of profound honor instead, for in the end, it was Maddie, the designated maid, the forgotten family member, the uninvited bridesmaid, who had cleaned away the lies, polished the truth until it gleamed, and restored order to a household on the brink of irreparable damage. And she had done it the way true love always does, not with grand gestures or public declarations, but with a simple letter, written in the middle of the night, offered without expectation of reward or recognition. Just truth, spoken in love when it mattered most. The story of Maddie's courage didn't end with that wedding night, with that moment of confrontation on the terrace. It continued to unfold in quieter ways, in the daily choices to remain authentic, to speak truth, to offer grace to those who are still finding their way. 2 years later, as Maddie prepared to begin her first year of law school and Olivia completed her teaching certification, the cousins decided to honor their journey by creating a small foundation in Elena's name. Its purpose was simple but profound: to provide support for young people navigating grief, particularly those who had lost parents at a formative age. "We're calling it the Truth Tellers," Olivia explained to me as we sat at my kitchen table reviewing the paperwork. "Because that's what Mom taught us, and what Maddie remembered when I forgot, that speaking truth with love is the greatest gift we can give each other." The foundation began small: weekend retreats for grieving teens, a scholarship program for those pursuing helping professions, community workshops on authentic communication. David contributed his architectural skills to design a modest retreat center on a wooded parcel of land he owned outside of Oak Ridge. Local therapists volunteered their time. Olivia developed programs for the younger children, while Maddie handled the legal and organizational aspects. What made the foundation unique was its emphasis not just on processing grief, but on developing the courage to live authentically in its aftermath, to resist the pressure to perform happiness, to package loss into neat narratives, to become what others need rather than discovering one's own path forward. Grief doesn't end, Olivia told the first group of teens at their weekend retreat. It transforms, sometimes into wisdom, sometimes into art, sometimes into the courage to live differently than before. She shared her own story openly, not the sanitized version, but the messy truth of how loss had sent her searching for security, in all the wrong places. How she had almost married a man who saw her only as a means to an end. How her cousin's courage had brought her back to herself. The teens listened with the focused attention that comes from recognition, from hearing your own unspoken feelings given voice by someone who truly understands. Later, in small discussion groups, many of them spoke for the first time about the pressures they felt to move on, to be strong, to become the person their lost parent would have wanted rather than discovering who they truly were. My dad was an accountant, one girl shared hesitantly. Everyone just assumes I'll become one too, to honor him. But I want to study music. I don't know how to tell my mom. My mom was the perfect homemaker, another admitted. I feel guilty every time I burn dinner or forget to make my bed, like I'm failing her somehow. Maddie led these discussions with the same quiet strength she had shown that wedding night, listening deeply, offering perspectives without imposing answers, creating safe spaces for authentic expression. The work wasn't glamorous or headline-grabbing. It didn't come with social prestige or financial rewards, but it was genuinely transformative, both for the participants and for the cousins themselves. David, too, found healing through his involvement with the foundation. Working alongside his daughter and niece, he gradually released the rigid expectations he had internalized about what it meant to honor Elena's memory. He began dating again, not society women like Vivian, but a kind widow he met while volunteering. At a community garden, someone who appreciated his quiet depth and growing authenticity. Elena would approve, he told me one evening as we watched a bonfire at the retreat center. Teenagers circled around the flames, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows. Not because Martha is like her. They're quite different, actually. But because I'm not trying to replace what I lost. I'm building something new that honors who I am now. As for me, I found my own role in this unfolding story, not as the protagonist or even the wise mentor, but as the faithful witness who saw the beauty in these interconnected journeys of becoming. My classroom teaching took on new dimensions, as I incorporated lessons on authentic communication and emotional intelligence alongside literature and grammar. Maddie's courage had inspired me to speak more candidly with my students about the messier aspects of growing up, about the pressure to conform, about the liberation that comes with embracing one's genuine nature. On the third anniversary of The Wedding That Wasn't, Olivia and Connor became engaged, not with a flashy diamond and elaborate proposal, but with a simple question asked during a sunrise hike to the lake where she and Maddie had spent childhood summers. The ring was Elena's, reset with a small sapphire that had been Connor's grandmother's, a blending of family legacies that felt deeply right to both of them. This time, the wedding planning focused on meaning rather than display, on gathering loved ones rather than impressing strangers. Olivia asked Maddie to be her maid of honor. My real one this time, she said with a laugh that held no bitterness, only the wisdom that comes from seeing clearly how far one has traveled. The wedding itself was held in my backyard on a perfect June day, with wildflowers in mason jars, fairy lights strung between trees, and a small band of local musicians playing songs Elena had loved. David walked Olivia down a simple aisle of rose petals, his face alight with genuine pride. Not in the spectacle of the occasion, but in the woman his daughter had become. Connor waited beneath an arch of vines and summer blooms, his eyes never leaving Olivia's face as she approached. The look between them contained none of the calculation I had seen with Richard, only the clear recognition of two people who had chosen each other authentically, who had done the work to know themselves, before committing to build a life together. Olivia wore a simple linen dress, her hair loosely braided with daisies, her feet bare beneath the hem. Around her neck gleamed Elena's pearl pendant, returned by Maddie for this day only, a symbol not of adherence to traditions or expectations, but of the ongoing conversation between past and present, between mothers and daughters, between who we were and who we are becoming. Maddie stood beside her cousin in a dress of her own choosing, her quiet beauty radiating from within, not from designer labels or carefully curated appearances, but from the serenity that comes with living in alignment with one's truest self. She held a small bouquet of the same wildflowers she and Olivia had gathered as children, playing at being forest sprites in the meadows of Oak Ridge. As the simple ceremony unfolded, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought us all to this moment. How one act of casual cruelty at a bridal shower had set in motion a cascade of truth-telling that ultimately saved not just Olivia from a loveless marriage, but all of us from the prisons of our own making. How sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as wounds. How courage, once awakened, continues to ripple outward in ways we can never fully anticipate. How being called the Maid can become an unexpected honor when we understand that true service isn't about status or recognition, but about the courage to clean away whatever obscures the authentic self, in ourselves, in those we love, in the world around us. As Olivia and Connor exchanged vows written in their own words, I looked around at the gathered community, not society figures or business connections, but people who had earned their places through genuine relationship. I saw in their faces the reflection of what matters most, not the polished performances we offer to impress others, but the messy, beautiful truth of who we are beneath all pretense. And I knew with bone-deep certainty that this authentic gathering, this honest celebration, this courage to live as ourselves, was what Elena had truly wanted for her daughter all along. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.